Hi everybody, welcome back to Happy Little Diodes. I've had a repair job land today, and it is this interface 1 and a microdrive to go with it. As far as I'm aware, the microdrive isn't damaged, but we want to refurbish it and try and get it working as best we can. The interface 1, on the other hand, has taken a hit. I'm a little bit worried because there's a sticker on the back that says Refurbished Mutant Caterpillar October 2020. Doesn't get much better than that. But the worrying part is new ULA NZ. That implies to me we're going to find a VLA in there which has been shipped all the way from New Zealand and will be quite expensive to replace. It also says new ROM. I guess that's had a fix in it. I know that the old ROMs on these things had a bug which needed fixing, and the case has the telltale melty spot of doom. So the ULA in this has cooked, but I reckon that was the previous ULA before it was upgraded in 2020. I got a letter with the shipment that says, "Hi Happy Little Diodes, as discussed, enclosed is the interface 1 I broke when using an edge connector doubler cable, plus a microdrive I bought recently." Well, the edge connector doubler cable apparently has caused some trouble, possibly shorted some pins out. I don't know, we'll have to have a look inside and see what we can find. Okay, here it is on the bench, and we can clearly see that a ULA has burned out in this at some point. As I said, that couldn't have been the VLA, I can't see that failing in that way, so that must be a historic failure. And it was refurbished in October 2020 by Mutant Caterpillar, and it's had a new ULA in, which will be a VLA1, I bet. For you serial spotters, this is D04177224. I don't really know what any of that means, but there it is. In pencil on the sticker here, it says new ROM 80. 80 refers to the result of typing in a particular command, as described here in the December-January 1984 edition of your Spectrum. If you type close #0:print peak 23729, you will either get a result of 0 if you have the old ROM, or 80 for a new ROM. So if I type that command into this interface, if it was working, we would see 80 as the result. This isn't the first VLA1 we've seen on the channel. I installed one on a previous video, also set it up with this V drive, which is an SD card based microdrive. Link in the description if you want to go and have a look at that. So let's have a closer look around the interface we'll be working on. There's our horrible melty spot of doom. That won't be a problem for us today. We're going to open it up and let's have a look at what we're faced with. I'm expecting there won't be anything visibly obviously wrong with it. We're going to have to go probing, looking for issues which may have been introduced when this edge connector mishap happened. There seems to be 5 screws on the bottom side of the interface that should be removed. The 2 holes on the bottom left and bottom right are 4 very long screws which go all the way through and attach to your Spectrum to keep everything firmly in place. With those removed, we can remove the underside of the case and we can see the bottom of our PCB. Nothing obviously wrong there. We need to remove the top side of the case too, and you don't actually need to remove these 2 silver screws. They are holding the connector in place. You would only need to remove these if you were aiming to remove the edge connector, which would be a lot of desoldering, and I can't see any reason to do that unless something's happened to the interface which has bent the long pins which lead up to the edge connector. These 2 on the other hand do need to be removed. These are holding the board to the top half of the case, so with these 2 removed, it's just a case of getting the connector through the little opening on the case to remove the PCB. And here it is, there's the VLA1 we expected to see. You can also see it's had some new capacitors fitted. This particular VLA, made in 2019, is on a black PCB. I guess that's random, I don't know, the last one I had was green. We've got some lovely blue V-shaped capacitors, the same ones I use if I'm recapping a Spectrum on there. Here's our ROM chip and it says Rev2 on there. I guess that might be related to it being the new version of the ROM. I don't know, maybe. And here's the VLA1 2019 version 2.1 from the brilliant Charlie Ingley. This is the CPLD chip, which is the heart of the VLA1. There's literally only 6 components on this board, 6 electrical components, 2 capacitors, 2 resistors, voltage regulator, and the CPLD chip, which has 100 pins. Now, the thought of soldering that in place by hand terrifies me. You've seen how useless I am at SMD soldering. Must practice more. Here's a voltage regulator anyway, 3 pin connections. Ground on the left, voltage out on the middle, and voltage in on the right. I've had a VLA82 fail in the past, which is a ZX Spectrum ULA replacement, and the voltage regulator had gone, so I want to test that very quickly. The way I'm going to do this is to find the 5V supply and the ground on the edge connector, and feed 5V to the regulator and measure its output. So here we go, I've found 5V on pin 3B, and 6B and 7B gives our ground. Let's set up our power supply to give us 5V with a maximum current of something reasonable. There it seems to be on 230 milliamps, that'll do. We're just going to see what the output of the voltage regulator is. Hopefully we get 3.3 volts. So I've plugged in these wires into those pins on the edge connector, and I'm going to measure the voltages. Here's our voltage in. We got 4.6 volts. There must be some voltage drop there because of the resistors, and the voltage out 3.296. So it looks like our voltage regulator is behaving itself. Hopefully the CPLD chip is also okay, and the fault on this interface 1 is somewhere else on the board. So at this point I went a bit nuts with continuity testing, looking for shorts, and I actually did find a short. Yeah, there's our fault, or at least there's one fault. While doing that, I spotted some traces around the VLA which were looking in pretty bad shape. They seem to have continuity, but some kind of dodgy repair works happened on this before it got to Mutant Caterpillar, probably a ULA replacement after the original one blew up. And some traces seem to have been lifted, although it doesn't seem to have stopped the board from working until this recent failure. So let's have a look at our short. Pins 20 and 21 of our VLA1 have continuity. That's D7 of the data bus and ground. That's definitely going to stop this thing from working. And check this out, maybe a coincidence, but 5V and D7 are directly opposite each other on the edge connector, so maybe some kind of short happened between those opposite pins. Maybe the edge connector flipped everything upside down. I don't know, just speculating. What we need to do now is isolate the fault. So I've desoldered the D7 pin of the ROM chip. I'm going to check to see if the fault is still there. And yes, it looks like we still have continuity between those 2 pins. Here's another view. Yes, we have continuity, and I can show you here. Yes, the D7 pin of the ROM chip is isolated from the PCB. And I'm going to measure from the top side to be totally sure. This is the D7 pin of the edge connector. I can touch the pin of the ROM chip, and this is pin 17. I'm not going to get continuity, but I can then go and check pins 20 and 21 of the VLA, and I have continuity to both pins. So the ROM chip definitely is okay. My next step is going to be doing the same thing with the VLA, so let's desolder pin 21, which is D7. Honestly, this was much easier than I expected. I thought this would be a troublesome task, but here I can show you that the pin is isolated from the PCB. I have no continuity to the pin. I do have continuity to the pad. Where should this leave us? We should have no continuity from D7 on the edge connector to the ROM chip, and we don't. We do to the board, that's right, and we don't to the VLA. That's okay, that means we've isolated D7 from both chips. So here's the test. Do we have continuity between D7 and ground on the VLA? Hopefully not. We do. That's not good. At this point, in complete denial of reality, I decided to remove the VLA entirely from the board and test it again to be 110% sure that this expensive component is the problem. And I found some interesting stuff going on underneath. There are multiple pads missing from here, and we can see some mangled traces. I'm just proving to myself here that it wasn't me that removed that pad. It must have happened during that initial bodged repair when the ULA blew up. Here's another one with a dodgy trace. I think we spotted that when we were first inspecting the board. And yeah, that's not something that I've damaged, thankfully. Now there's a third missing pad a bit further along with a pretty sorry looking trace there. And in fact this one did come out when I removed it. I didn't expect it to come out very cleanly because the pins are so big and rigid on this thing, and I'm gonna tell myself that that came out because it was partially on its way out when that last repair happened. Last but not least, another pad has been lost and we spotted that this trace was lifted. Seems to be our voltage supply. This is pin 40, so that must have also been damaged during that initial repair. Now I don't know what I was expecting here, but let's do our continuity test. And yep, we still have continuity. Seems like we have a short either on the board or within the CPLD chip. Now clutching at straws, I can't see anywhere on the board where this short might have occurred, so I've got a feeling the CPLD chip is dead and I'm going to remove it anyway. Why not? Let's see if we can get it off. I'm going to do this with a heat gun. I'm going to gently apply some force to the corner of the chip with a set of tweezers, trying to protect the rest of it using tin foil, and there it goes, it came off and I successfully smashed it into the resistors around the voltage regulator on the left. So I was pushing a little bit too hard there, lesson learned. Here we are, there's our resistors all displaced. I'm going to try and put them back in place very roughly just to do this final continuity test, and then we can write this thing off. Incidentally and not surprisingly, the pins on the CPLD chip for D7 and ground are not adjacent, so it wasn't a short around the soldering of the CPLD chip. There's our resistors very roughly bodged back in place, and a quick test and we do not get continuity between these pins, so finally I can confirm that this is a write-off and we're going to either have to find a new ULA or a new interface 1 and probably transfer the new ROM chip from this one into that. And fast forward a week or two, here it is. The owner of the interface 1 sent me another one for refurbishment and to transfer the ROM chip if needed. It has this genuine sticker on, but I don't think that means anything. It's just something the eBay seller who sold this thing sticks on all of their products. I don't think it's an effective anti-tamper sticker. I just peeled it off fairly easily and I might as well put it back on there when I'm done. So I'm not going to bore you with taking all the screws out. Here it is. Here's our new interface 1. It looks a bit cleaner than the previous one. That's good. Let's have a look at the top side. And yeah, everything seems to be in order. We've got a black capacitor on there. Maybe that's been swapped at some point. There's a transistor mod around the ULA. I think that's normal. And a ROM chip in there, and I cannot tell by looking at it if it's an old or a new style ROM chip. Overall though, this seems to be in much better condition than the previous interface 1, so this seems like we've made the right choice. We're going to get this one up and running. I want to do a quick test. If you remember this command, see what result we get. We're looking for 80, cross your fingers. Looks like we're going to have to do a ROM transplant. Okay, no worries, we can do that. Let's get this one removed, and I will warn you, if you're going to do this, this is a bit awkward. Unless you want to remove the edge connector, you're going to be working on a ROM chip which is firmly hidden underneath the floating edge connector. So be very careful, because I can see that it's very possible to damage the board here if you don't take your time and be careful. I haven't shown you the 20 minutes of carefully removing solder and wobbling this chip around until all the pins became free before I removed it. Here's the markings on the top. I'm going to stick a little sticker on there with scribbled interface 1 ROM 0 so I know what it is. Now back to our dead board, Trigger's broom. Let's have a look. Let's see if we can get the ROM chip out of this one just as easily. I'm going to still be careful because this board might still have a future. And our new ROM has a missing pin. Oh dear. I guess the connection was still made, but I'm still going to add a little donor leg on there just to make sure we don't have any issues. Here it is. I've taken it from an old socket, and with my eyeballs I swear this went on straight, but with the macro lens, okay, it's a bit wonky, but the pin spacing is correct and it went in without any protest. So let's solder it in place. What else do we need to do after this? We need to replace the 3 capacitors and we should be good to go. We should have a refurbished interface 1. All the electrolytics on the interface 1 are 47 microfarads. I'm going to use the last of my batch of bullet shaped white package capacitors, which I really like. Okay, lovely, we're looking good. I'm going to plug it in now just to see if it works. Hopefully it will, and if it does work, I'm going to try that command out and see if we get the result 80. And we do. Awesome. Now we can turn our attention to the microdrive, which came with this interface 1 job. Here it is. I'm going to give it a quick run with my known good refelted microdrive, see what we can get it to format to. We're hoping for over 80 kilobytes, maybe over 90. Let's see what we get. I'm going to call it test. I'm fast forwarding a little bit because it takes a little while to do this. And it's going to return OK. Then we can run cat1. It's going to tell us the capacity of the microdrive and hopefully the name of it. Okay, got the name right, but the capacity is 0, so we are not formatting well. But that's okay, we know what to do with these, we've done them in the past. First thing to do is open it up, which means getting the faceplate off because there are 2 screws under there. This thing is glued on with the biggest sheet of double-sided sticky tape I've ever seen, but it came off with a little bit of encouragement from the heat gun. I didn't bend the faceplate, which is lovely. We can now remove the 2 top screws. And we also need to remove this plastic bracket thingy off the bottom, and that should allow us to separate the case. The top lifts off and there's a little latch on the back here, and once that's off you pop the LED out and here's what we see. It's recommended to replace C3 and C4 and in some cases this 7805 regulator. I'm just going to replace them all because why not? We want this thing to be running its best. Another apparent useful mod to do is to fit C7 and C9, which are unpopulated. These can just be 100 picofarad capacitors. This allegedly improves reliability, so let's do that. Why not? Can't hurt, right? Finally, there's this extra electrolytic capacitor which is sticking through 2 vias on the baseboard. I'm going to replace that as well because we tend to replace electrolytics on the ZX Spectrum and its accessories. I can just about get through here to snip the first leg of these 2 capacitors, which should make removing them fairly easy. I'm not being lazy here, I'm deliberately working on the board while it's attached to the case because I'm worried about disturbing the alignment of the tape head reader, so it seems fairly accessible. I'm just going to work on these exactly where they are. Similarly with the 7805, I've snipped the 2 legs I had access to and then easily removed it. Now going to remove these 2 legs and clear the joints. Here's the replacement 7805 going in. I did think about using a switching regulator. I've never heard of anyone using a switching reg on a microdrive. I don't know if that would be good or bad, so I'm just going to stick with the original intended component. I'm replacing the 2 electrolytics either side of the 7805 with 1 microfarad capacitors. According to the Bite the Light Microdrive refurbishment manual, link in the description, that's okay to do. So what about C7 and C9? Well, I'm going to have to dismantle a little bit further because I need to access those joints. So let's try and get the bottom of the case off. I had to remove that sticker and there we are, we're in now. I'm going to free up these joints on C7. And having removed the bottom of the case, I can pull the board out a bit and extend these ribbon cables, give myself access to the joints on C9, just about. These are the capacitors I'm going to put in their place. They're marked 101, 100 picofarads. C7 is easy to access this particular joint, but there's a problem, the motor is in the way, my access to the other joint. That's not the best news because we might disturb the alignment of the motor head, but we're going to have to get in there to make the joint, so we need to remove these two tiny little screws and get the motor out of the way so we can see the underside of the headboard. And there I can just about access the joint now. Same for C9, I'll be able to access those two joints when I fit the capacitor there. Popping it in there using tweezers is quite awkward to do with my fat fingers, and we'll solder it in place. Then we just need to replace the final electrolytic on the baseboard. We're going to need to take the baseboard off the case. That's two screws here. That will allow us to access the underside of it and deal with this final electrolytic capacitor. And there it is removed. Just checking, it's 22 microfarad, that's cool, I've got a drawer full of them. Let's dig one out and get it in place. First of all, cleaning up these two via joints, which this mod has gone into. I don't even know what this mod does, to be honest. I just saw an electrolytic and thought, let's replace it. Now it's just a case of putting everything back together again and giving it a spin. Oh, and we mustn't forget to clean the tape head and the rubber roller. You can replace these rubber rollers, but this particular one doesn't seem very worn and seems to be, as you'll see, performing fairly well. Here we go again, trying to format this particular tape. I know this is a good tape, so we should get 80 or 90 kilobytes out of it, and this time 33. Well, we've made some improvement, but that's not great, and I did notice it sounded a bit rough when it was running. We can see here, this is where the rubber roller engages with the tape, and we don't want that to be too loose, otherwise the tape slips and it sounds rough when it's running. It doesn't give you that nice whooshy sound, it's a bit more grumbly. And the way to fix that, well, on this particular Microdrive, the way to fix that was to bend the clamp spring, this spring, using some bullnose pliers over to the left so that it engages the tape with the roller with a little bit more force. Just showing here on this shot, you can see how the clamp spring is pushing the tape over to the left. And let's try again. Again, anything over 80 is a good result. What did we get? 93, brilliant. I think that's the biggest I've ever managed to format. That's cool. I did repeat this process a few times, removing and reinserting the drive just to make sure that it was running consistently, and yeah, we were getting 90, 93-ish every time. So there we have it, we have a Triggers Broom refurbished ZX Interface 1 and a refurbished ZX Microdrive, which is formatting very nicely. Bit of a journey this one, but we got there in the end. I'll get these packaged up and back to the owner. As always, thank you for watching. Please do share these videos if you enjoy them.